you know, I was struck earlier in Ned's presentation about his comment about the governor failing to understand that this is a crisis in which we could, in fact, reinvent Connecticut, and she's clearly not prepared to do that. This is one of those areas where we have to recreate who we are, what we are, and how we do business, because clearly what we're doing is creating an unsustainable state, and a part of that inability to sustain ourselves is this rapidly growing property taxes, which is having an adverse impact on young people and an adverse impact on our senior population. So we're gonna throw both of them out, and we're doing an incredible job when it comes to young people, throwing them out of state. We're going to throw both of them out, and who's going to be left? I mean, it's a problem.
I don't know if this is correct or not, but I grew up in the 50s in Stratford, Connecticut, Sikorsky, Apcoa-Lycoming. Apcoa-Lycoming's no longer there. A lot of our original set of the property tax geared to education, I think, might have been based on World War II economy, which had a lot of the military-industrial complex in Connecticut.
You're drilling down to what are particular problems in particular silos, and you're absolutely right. I mean, next to Detroit, more munitions were made in Bridgeport, Connecticut during the Second World War than any other municipality in the country. Bridgeport's population was estimated to be about 200,000 people during the war for that purpose. You're absolutely right. But just because it's a problem there doesn't mean it's not a problem in Harwinton. I mean, it's a problem throughout our state. And if you understand that if no one makes a decision to reverse that trend, and therefore your economy continues to slowly collapse, and therefore you continue to make underinvestments in infrastructure, including public education. I mean, this becomes this cycle of, you know what we're very good at in Connecticut? Dying a slow death. That's where we excel. And somebody's got to ultimately change that proposition. Governor, this is amazing to me. The governor didn't go to the White House and didn't go to the first conference that a newly elected president had, largely around the issue of the stimulus package. Didn't attend. We just don't get it. The governor, and by the way, she left at least $2 billion unaddressed in her budget. At least $2 billion unaddressed. And the cliff in 11 and 12, before the particularly bad news of the last 90 days, was already predicted to be $5 billion in 11 and $5.5 billion in 12. I mean, this is a nightmare waiting to happen. And I think what you're seeing a lot of people do, and Ned and Sebas are absolutely doing the right thing. They're speaking truth to danger, and a big part of politics in our country is he who can hide the danger the best wins, and that's what the governor tried to do in her budget address. So you know, his piece, along with Mr. Sebas in the Current, was a crystalline call to change. And we all need to start speaking the truth. But the reality is, so far, relatively few people have taken up that challenge.
How do we rank nationally? It seems a lot of people find our tax burden here pretty attractive overall, don't they?
Well, certain industries clearly do. I mean, we are a less. Well, you know, actually, let me speak to financial services. We are clearly a less costly alternative to Chicago and New York, which are far less costly alternatives for financial services than London, for instance. So when I was at the White House at the invitation of the president a few weeks ago, sitting in front of me in the West Room was the mayor, Richard Daley, is a friend of mine, and half the people at UBS were laid off in Chicago, and about 20% of the people in Stamford were. And part of that is cost. Now, having said that, we are a relatively high cost state, and we're a relatively high tax state, but not anywhere near the highest tax by any stretch of the imagination. So we're not going to be able to undercut, we're not going to be able to create, to change that, because of one of the reasons that we have relatively high taxation is because we were dead last in job growth. So there was no, if your economy is not robust, the burden left to those who are still there and still operating becomes larger and larger and larger. So that really is the problem. Now,
We're starved for revenue.
we're starved for revenue because we refuse to grow, because we refuse to make long-term investments. One of the reasons Stamford is successful is when I became mayor 14 years ago, I replaced a series of mayors who had really refused to invest in infrastructure. So we changed that. We're investing in infrastructure, and not surprisingly, people have decided to come to our city. One of the most interesting things, when I became mayor of Stamford 14 years ago, any building that was close to the railroad station rented at about a 30% discount. Now any building, we lowered crime. We lowered crime by 67%, and a lot of that crime was generated in the area of the railroad station. Now the rents near the railroad station are a premium. Exactly. So you can reverse direction. But as bad as things are in Connecticut, things are even worse in New York State and New York City. And a smart governor would be taking stock of how do we, as things start to change, how does Connecticut benefit? How do we what investments do we have to make to invest? One of the reasons that New Jersey has had more robust growth in many fields that we could have competed against them in, they recreated ferry service. They redid the entrances and exits on all their major highways in the last 20 years. They have bus lines that didn't exist. They have light rail systems that didn't exist. They replaced their rail cars at the cost of the federal government because they competed for the money, something that we never did. So you look at, and you could literally get pictures now of over a 30-year period and look at the development between Manhattan and Princeton, and the same thing here. We're closing things, they're opening things.